Hey, so towards the end of last week, I got this Line 6 Catalyst 60 in the mail from Sweetwater. If you're unfamiliar with Line 6's Catalyst line of amps, they're an entry-level modeling amp that comes in the 60 watt variation, which is what we have here. They also come in 100 watt and 200 watt variations. If you don't know what a modeling amp is simply a guitar amp like this one that has technology in it that allows it to sound like a bunch of different amps. And you can choose the kind of amp that you want it to sound like based on the kind of music that you're trying to play. So over this weekend, I've spent a ton of time jamming with the Catalyst. I've had so much fun with it. It's my first experience with a modeling amp, and I worked out 4 tones from very well-known iconic guitarists that I used to create 4 short guitar lessons that I posted here on YouTube, on Instagram, and TikTok also. And I thought it might be fun and helpful for me to share how I got those 4 really great guitar tones on this entry-level Line 6 amp. Now quickly before we dive into each tone, the 2 guitars that I used to get these tones through the Catalyst are my Gibson ES335 and my PRS Silver Sky. I wanted to use these 2 guitars because one has humbucker pickups, the Gibson 335, and the other has single coil pickups, the Silver Sky. 2 very different styles of guitar and sounds. I wanted to show you guys that just to show you the variety of what this amp can do with different kinds of pickups and different kinds of guitars. And lastly, I just wanted to take a quick second to thank Sweetwater for sponsoring this video and sending out the Line 6 Catalyst 60 for me to try out. I'll have Sweetwater links to all the gear that I used in this video down in the description below for those of you who are interested. Now, the first tone I went for this weekend was an AC/DC tone. Now, personally, I'm not a huge classic rock guy. I know, sacrilegious for a guitarist to say, but I do go through phases where I am into that kind of sound and into that music here and there. And when I saw some of the options available on this amp, that stood out to me as one that was just like, oh, that would be so fun to get that kind of sound out of this. And so I started experimenting, and I got that really cool back in black sound that you just heard. Now, first, my guitar settings to get this. I was using my 335 on the neck pickup setting with my tone knob to about 7.5. Now, getting into my amp settings. First of all, on the Catalyst, it comes with this kind of like plastic thing on top that has a little bit about each kind of amp tone that you can get with the modeler here. On the flip side, it has a breakdown of the different effects and how to get them. This has actually been super duper helpful, so I've definitely kept it on for now and probably will for a while as I'm still kind of learning how to use this. Okay, getting into my back in black amp settings. First of all, over here on the far left is your modeler selector. So that's going to change the style of amp that you're wanting to play with. It also down here kind of gives you an idea of which kind of amp each setting is based off of. So with that in mind, I picked this crunch tone here for our back in black AC/DC sound. The reason for that is because it is crunchy with a British accent, which very much describes AC/DC and that kind of classic rock, particularly AC/DC kind of tone. So we went crunch. I gave us a little bit of boost about halfway, and I gave us our gain about halfway up as well, about 6 o'clock. And then here's where we get into the EQ settings. So for bass here, I dialed this back. I think this was about at like 3 or 4. And then here's where things kind of get cranked up a little bit. AC/DC kind of has a lot of mids in theirs and a lot of treble. You got that real kind of high, cutting through kind of sound. So not a whole lot of bass, quite a bit of middle, quite a bit of treble. I kept presence at about 6 o'clock, and then I did give us just a little bit of reverb. Reverb's at about 2, not too much. There are several different kinds of reverb. For this one, I believed I used the chamber reverb, which sounds great. And then the master volume was at about like 5 o'clock-ish. And those are the settings on the Catalyst that I used to get that back in black AC/DC tone. I also used this to try to tinker around with some other songs like TNT and a couple other AC/DC songs, and was able to get really close to those as well with just some minor adjustments to the EQ. Now, I was super impressed by how quickly and easily I was able to get that kind of sound out of this amp with, again, no other effect pedals or anything like that. It's literally just 335 straight into the Catalyst. The second tone that I went for was a Foo Fighters Learn to Fly kind of sound. My wife and I are huge fans of Foo Fighters, so I was particularly stoked for this one. For my guitar settings for this Foo Fighters tone, I was using a 335, which is actually really true to what Dave Grohl plays. He plays a 335 as well. My 335 settings were about like this. So middle position, so we're using both pickups. On the neck pickup, we're at about 9.5 volume, and we're about 8.5 tone. And on the bridge pickup, we're at about 7.5 volume and 7.5 tone. Now on to amp settings for the Foo Fighter tone. Starting with our amp selector here. I used the dynamic tone which is a highly touch responsive mid-gain tone, which to me sounded pretty Foo Fighters-esque. I kept our boost at about 6 o'clock. I kept our gain at about 6 o'clock. I upped the bass just a little bit from the AC/DC tone, so we're at probably about 4.5, 5 there. I upped the mids just a tiny bit from the AC/DC tone, so we're looking at about like maybe 7, 7.5 there. Treble is about the same actually, so I think I upped that just a tiny bit, so about 7.5. And then presence right about 6. And I bumped the reverb up just a bit to maybe about 4. And then the master is about the same as it was on the AC/DC tone, which is, yeah, about 5-ish. So those settings from the Catalyst were able to get me really close to that Learn to Fly Foo Fighters kind of sound. I also experimented with some other songs like Everlong and Best of You, and this tone worked really well for those songs with just some minor EQ tweaking and gain tweaking where it was needed as well. Really great tone. Again, kind of shocked I can get that close to those tones with about a $300 amp. Next I was on to some Red Hot Chili Peppers with Otherside. For this sound, I switched over to my Silver Sky because John Frusciante is well known for playing Strats and Strat style guitars, i.e. Silver Sky. And for this one, the tone was set to, first of all, neck pickup, and then I did about 8 on the tone knob. I kind of moved this around depending on what Chili Peppers song I was playing, but for Otherside, I felt like 8 was pretty spot on. Now, for my Chili Peppers amp settings, I kept it on the dynamic amp setting. I felt like that worked well. It kind of has like almost like a Marshall kind of sound, which again, Chili Peppers are kind of known for using that kind of amp for most of their stuff. So kept it on dynamic, kept the boost about the same. I kind of mostly just kept this at 6 o'clock. I thought it sounded pretty good, and I don't know, it just worked for me. I turned the gain down quite a bit here for this Chili Peppers sound. So we're at about 3. It probably could have even used a little bit less because Otherside is a pretty clean tone, but I kept it at about 3 and it seemed to work out for me. Turn the bass up a little bit to about 6, mids about 6, and turn the treble down quite a bit to about 5. Turn the presence up just a little bit to probably about 7 or just a little bit past. Still no effects here. And then I did reverb at about 3, so I kind of turn that back down from our previous tone. The master is about the same. And that was my setup for getting that Chili Peppers sound for Otherside. This is a pretty almost, I don't want to say generic, but kind of just a general clean tone for that intro sound. And then obviously it gets a little bit more gainy and stuff later in the song. I thought that that was kind of a good, just kind of neutral, clean tone since the first 2 tones we were after were a little bit dirtier. To be completely honest with you guys, I actually tried some other Chili Peppers songs that sounded really good and used very similar settings, but with like a little bit higher gain, a little bit more reverb. I actually even tried out a chorus effect that kind of gave a cool sound on like Can't Stop and a couple other songs. But to be completely honest with you guys, I was actually struggling a lot to play a lot of that stuff. And I sat here for hours trying to get a good take to play through some of those songs. And I just couldn't. I don't play a lot of Chili Peppers, and I kind of underestimated how difficult it would be. So I kind of went a little bit with a cop-out one, because Otherside, at least the intro part is very, very easy, but I thought it worked well as well because it just kind of shows how this amp can get a really good clean tone, and I thought the tone for it was spot on too. Like, I thought that Otherside tone really, really worked and sounded just like the original song. And the fourth and last tone that I went after was a John Mayer tone with Gravity. Now this one is probably no surprise. I'm playing a Silver Sky. How could I not try some John Mayer on the Catalyst? But this is the one that I was most excited for and saved for last, because who wouldn't want to be able to get that beautiful John Mayer tone with all his boutique amps and thousands of dollars worth of pedals and thousands of dollars worth of guitars? Who wouldn't want to be able to get that tone out of a $299 amp? So for Gravity, my guitar settings on the Silver Sky were neck middle position. So these 2 pickups, very stereotypical John Mayer sound. And then I had my tone knob at about 8, 8.5. And actually, in retrospect, listening back to the audio afterwards, I wish I would have dialed the tone knob back just a little bit because I feel like it is a little bit too bright. Finally, onto my John Mayer Gravity settings on the Catalyst. First of all, I changed our amp selector over here to Boutique, which makes a lot of sense for John Mayer. Boutique is inspired by handcrafted tones. He uses a lot of boutique amps, primarily 2-rock and also some PRS stuff, which falls into that category. So I thought that was perfect. That was like made for the John Mayer tone. Kept our boost at about 6. That was kind of just my thing through most of the weekend. I just thought it sounded nice. And one quick little side note about this boost here. This actually changes what kind of boost it is based off of what amp you have selected, and it kind of is almost like an intelligent boost simulator. I read some things that people didn't like that, they wish they had more customization there, but I did not have a problem with it. I thought it sounded great and worked really well with every tone I was chasing. For gain, I kept the gain pretty low at about 3 or 3.5. That was a little hot. I might could have dialed that back even just a little bit, but it was really close. Bass, I kept it about 6. Mids, I dropped. John Mayer does a lot of kind of mid scoop sounds, so that's at about like 3.5. Treble is at about 4.5 or so, same kind of deal there. I kind of did this kind of almost slight mid scoop thing, which I felt like hit his tone pretty well. Presence still pretty high there. We're at like about 6.5 or 7. No effect still. Reverb is an interesting one. I actually switched up the reverb a little bit. So again, this amp has several different, I think 6 different reverb settings. So I'd been using the chamber reverb, which is what I was using for most of my other sounds. I actually switched over to the spring reverb for this John Mayer sound, which again, very true to his sound. It kind of is like almost inspired by kind of vintage tube amps and the reverbs that come in those. So that spring reverb worked very well. I thought it sounded pretty accurate to what an amp of his would sound like, and then master is still about the same. And those were my catalyst settings to get that John Mayer tone. Now, to be honest with you guys, when I was editing that video of Gravity, I was listening to it and I kind of felt like if I spent a little bit more time, I could have gotten a little bit closer. I was kind of fighting the sun going down and me losing my natural light, which I kind of am now too, actually. But like I said, I felt like if I would have cut my tone knob back just a tiny bit, that would have helped a little bit with that. And then, of course, if I wasn't fighting daylight and kind of rushing to get the video, I probably could have gotten it just even that much closer, but I still feel like it really got close. It was still really the essence of that tone, particularly with that boutique amp sound and the spring reverb. I felt like, I mean, that put me 90% of the way there. And then if I would have spent just a little bit more time, I could have gotten, you know, maybe not 100%, but maybe 98% or something like that. So those were the 4 tones I shared with you guys this weekend over shorts, TikToks, and reels. Again, I'm really not much of an expert when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm really just a dude with some guitars and a cool amp jamming in his room, but I got some really cool sounds, and whenever I'm jamming on guitar, what I love to do is sit down and try to match up what I'm playing with the original artist. I do this with acoustic guitar too, and the closer I can get in sound, the better, of course. And especially when I'm playing electric guitar, I really want to dial in that sound. I'm gonna have the most fun playing what I'm playing if I can get that sound as close as possible. And having an amp modeler with effects built in like the Catalyst helps me get those sounds as close as possible without having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on different amps and different effects pedals as well, which can be a rabbit hole to dive into and a fun rabbit hole to dive into, but a very expensive rabbit hole to dive into. So this video isn't really meant to be a review of the Catalyst. It's more just kind of a, hey, here's some cool sounds that I got. But I will say this, entry-level amps have come a very, very, very long way from whenever I first started playing guitar about 15 years ago. 15 years ago, you spend $300 on an amp and there's a pretty good chance it's still gonna kind of suck. It's not gonna be great, and you might only really be able to get just, you know, a small handful of good tones out of a $300-ish amp. Now, this amp, the Line 6 Catalyst 60, so this is the 60 watt version, is about $300, and competing amps are kind of in that same price range as well. And I'm kind of blown away by how many really legitimately good sounds I could get out of this. And I only showed you 4. There's a bunch of other ones that I have gotten, and again, I've only really spent a weekend with it so far, so I'm sure I'll only find more really good tones. And all of these tones I was able to find pretty quickly. Like, it didn't take long for me to kind of work these sounds out. And so what's so exciting about that for me in my first experience with a modeling amp is that beginner guitarists and even intermediate guitarists who don't have a huge budget can still get a really good sounding guitar amp for 300 bucks. And they're not stuck with some piece of junk or whatever, which to me, whenever beginners have gear that sounds good at a beginner budget, that makes me feel like those beginners are more likely to stick with the guitar. Whereas if you get your first guitar and maybe your first amp and it's kind of like, like it's not that great, there's a pretty good chance that you're gonna put that guitar away in the corner of a closet and it's gonna collect dust and you're just not gonna play it. In my mind, having some really affordable gear that actually really sounds legitimately good, it can be the difference between somebody sticking with guitar or not sticking with guitar. And to me, that's the most exciting thing about gear like the Catalyst. Great sounding gear at prices that are very reasonable. Again, thank you so much to Sweetwater for sponsoring this video and sending the Catalyst 60 for me to try out. I'll have Sweetwater links to the Catalyst 60 and all the other gear that I used in this video linked down in the description below for those of you who are interested. I've really enjoyed using the Catalyst 60 this past weekend to do some budget tone matching, and I plan to use it to do a lot more of that and be posting stuff on Instagram, TikTok, here on YouTube as well, using Catalyst 60 doing that tone matching. So let me know down in the comments below if there's any specific tones from any guitarists, artists, bands, anything like that that you think I should try out with the Catalyst 60, because I'll be doing a lot of that coming up. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see y'all soon.